Hello, friends. Welcome to the Shepard-Smith Compliance Consulting September 2026 Deep Dive. This is Frank and Wendy, your hosts for today's virtual banquet of information.
Banquet. Are we bringing the taste and leaving no waste?
Okay. How about plates full of grace, smiles on every face? That's a good one, right?
Well, it definitely sets the tone for sure.
Yeah, and it brings us right to the actual mission of today's deep dive. So for everyone listening, I want you to imagine securing a multi-million-dollar federal grant, right? You put months of agonizing work into the research, only to have your entire institution flagged by federal auditors.
Which is a nightmare.
Right, and not for how you spent the money and not for the quality of your science, but because you left, like, a single mandatory sentence off a public flyer.
Yeah, and honestly, it happens way more often than you might think. And the administrative fallout from that is just immense.
Exactly, which is why today is essentially a masterclass for university researchers, grant administrators, compliance officers, anyone in that space.
Yeah, because the goal here is to help you establish a really consistent, absolutely bulletproof infrastructure to comply with this little regulatory powerhouse known as the Stevens Amendment.
A powerhouse for sure. We want to take what usually feels like this sprawling compliance nightmare and basically systematize it into an everyday process for your teams.
Right, and to map that out, we have a very precise stack of sources today.
Yeah.
We're looking at the NIH Grants Policy Statement, the California Employment Development Department's Funding Disclosure Guide, a highly practical Department of Labor Stevens Amendment Desk Aid, and, of course, the September 2026 newsletter from Shepard-Smith Compliance Consulting.
Yeah, lots of good stuff in there. But before we get into the heavy federal regulations, I actually want to look at something featured in that Shepard-Smith newsletter. It's the calendar of super awesome events.
Oh, yeah. The calendar.
Yeah, because, there is actually a deep connection between how we manage a calendar and how we manage compliance.
Well, sure. A calendar represents predictable structure, right? It is the absolute baseline for organizational transparency.
Right. And September gives us a lot of structure to work with. On the serious side, it's National Suicide Prevention Month and World Alzheimer's Month.
Both very important.
Definitely. And on the scientific front, which I know our research audience is always tracking, NASA is launching the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope, to investigate dark matter and hunt for exoplanets.
Those are huge milestones. But I have a feeling the day-to-day calendar you're referring to is a bit more chaotic.
Oh, it is a truly rapid-fire list. Just listen to this schedule. We had the Labor Day weekend on September 4th, right? And then the 366th birthday of composer Henry Purcell on the 10th.
Okay, bit of a pivot there.
Oh, it gets better. Then we hit this bizarre stretch where September 12th is National Chocolate Milkshake Day. Because, didn't win a grant today. Have a milkshake anyway.
Naturally.
And that is followed immediately by National Celiac Disease Awareness Day on the 13th, Hispanic Heritage Month starting on the 15th, International Country Music Day on the 17th, and National Cheeseburger Day on the 18th.
Wow. Which, requires careful navigation if you happen to be the one planning the department's September office party,
Exactly. You've got Celiac Awareness Day sandwiched right between chocolate milkshakes and cheeseburgers. The irony. Right?
Yeah, you really have to watch the menu there.
For real. And rounding out the month, we have the last day of summer on the 21st, composer Jean-Philippe Rameau's 342nd birthday on the 25th, and National Toffee Day on the 29th.
So a lot going on.
A lot. But the point is, a calendar gives you a system. You know exactly what bizarre holiday is coming, and you can plan for it. But, when you look at how federal grant funding moves through a massive, decentralized university system, predictable is like the last word I would use.
Oh, absolutely. Without a rigid infrastructure, it is pure administrative chaos. You have dozens of different colleges, research centers, principal investigators, and they're all receiving varied streams of funding, all producing their own materials.
Yeah. And that friction between the chaos of decentralized research and the federal government's demand for strict, predictable transparency, that is exactly where the Stevens Amendment comes in.
Right. And to really understand how to manage it, you kind of have to understand the intent behind it first. So the Stevens Amendment was introduced around 1989 by U.S. Senator Ted Stevens.
Okay, it's been around a while.
Yeah, a long time. And at its core, it is an anti-waste, pro-accountability measure. It basically mandates that any recipients of funds from the Department of Labor, the Department of Health and Human Services, or the Department of Education, they must explicitly acknowledge that federal funding whenever they publicly discuss or promote their projects.
When I was reviewing the Desk A's and the EDD guidelines for this, a specific analogy kept coming to mind. I think the most powerful way to visualize the Stevens Amendment is to treat it as a mandatory food nutrition label, but, for federal spending.
Oh, I like that. That is a highly effective way for administrators to frame it for their faculty.
Yeah, because as a consumer, when I pick up a box of breakfast cereal, I have a fundamental right to turn it around and read the exact breakdown of, like, sugar, protein, and sodium.
Right, you want to know what's in it.
Exactly. The logic here is that the American taxpayer deserves that exact same breakdown for federally funded projects. They have a right to read the ingredients of the funding.
And just as a nutrition label has strict regulatory requirements for what must be listed, the Stevens Amendment requires 3 very specific financial facts to be stated on your public documents.
Okay, so if we take that nutrition label idea, I'm assuming there's a strict regulatory recipe here. Like, we aren't just slapping a generic funded by the U.S. government sticker on a flyer. We need specific metrics, right?
Precisely. Yeah, you can't just be vague. The 3 mandatory ingredients are, well, first, the percentage of the total costs of the program or project that will be financed with federal money.
Okay, so the percentage. Got it.
Second, the exact dollar amount of those federal funds.
The dollar amount.
And third, the percentage and dollar amount of the total cost that will be financed by non-governmental or non-federal sources.
Now wait, that third requirement about non-federal sources seems like it could trip people up.
How so?
Well, what if a university lands a grant from, say, Health and Human Services that doesn't require any university matching funds? Like, it's just 100% federally funded.
Ah, yeah. The NIH grants policy statement actually addresses this clearly. That third requirement is specifically aimed at programs that require cost sharing.
Okay.
So if your project is entirely funded by a federal award, your nutrition label simply states that fact, and you note that $0 or 0% are financed from non-governmental sources.
Oh, I see. So the formula still applies. The variable is just 0.
Exactly. You still have to account for it, even if it's 0.
Okay, but let's look at the sheer scale of a university for a second. If we mandate this nutrition label, does the compliance office have to force every single employee to stamp this on, like every single piece of paper?
That sounds exhausting.
Right. Like, are we talking about internal HR memos, invoices to vendors, or the napkins in the campus cafeteria?
No. And that is actually the most common fear when rolling out this compliance infrastructure. Thankfully, the scope is much narrower than that.
Oh, good.
Yeah, this rule applies specifically to public-facing documents that describe the federally funded projects or programs.
Okay, so the key distinction is whether the document faces the public and describes the work. So the sources mention things like press releases, requests for proposals, bid invitations, websites, flyers, toolkits, and visual presentations.
Correct. It does not apply to your internal routing sheets, your departmental budget emails, or the actual application you submit to get the grant in the first place.
Okay, so if a grant manager is emailing the biology department chair about, say, a budget shortfall, no label is needed.
Right, no label.
But the moment that biology department holds a public seminar about their findings and hands out a printed agenda to the audience, that agenda needs the label.
That is the exact line of demarcation. If it enters the public domain and discusses the project, this disclosure absolutely must be there.
Well, knowing where the line is drawn is half the battle, right? But the other half is standardizing the numbers. We both know grants rarely arrive as a clean single-year deposit.
Oh, almost never.
Right. So how does a university build a consistent infrastructure when they are dealing with incredibly complex multi-year funding scenarios?
Yeah, this is where centralized system design becomes critical. You really cannot leave it up to individual researchers to calculate these formulas on the fly. They'll get it wrong.
Yeah, that sounds like a disaster waiting to happen.
It is. But the California EDD and Department of Labor sources offer some crucial guidance for standardizing these tricky timeframes.
Let's use one of the examples from the text then. Say a researcher secures a retained grant. And for those outside of that specific sphere, retained grants are federal initiatives focused on keeping injured or ill workers in the workforce.
Right.
So let's say the award is $225,000, but it spans a 3-year project period. When the researcher makes a flyer in year 1, do they amortize that number? Do they, divide it by 36 months?
They do not. The Department of Labor Desk Aid instructs grantees to use the current fiscal year's annual award amount.
Oh, just the current year.
Right. So you don't look at the longer 3-year project period. You look at the total annual award received for that specific budget period. So in the EDD's retained grant example, the disclosure would clearly state the total award of $225,000 for that period.
Which makes sense because federal appropriations happen annually. I mean, if you try to chop up a multi-year grant into monthly increments on a flyer, you're actually misrepresenting the scale of the current year's funding.
Exactly. It completely distorts the financial reality. And, another scenario that frequently causes compliance failures involves grants awarded in multiple rounds.
Oh, right. The sources highlight the Workforce Accelerator Fund, or WEF. So these are state-level initiatives designed to drive employment innovation, often using federal pass-through money, right?
Yes.
So what happens if a university gets a WEF 8.0 award for, say, $150,000 to test one cohort, and then later receives a WEF 9.0 award for $175,000 to test another?
Okay, good question.
Can the communications department just lump them together and say, we received $325,000 in WEF funding just to save space on their website?
They cannot. The guidance is completely uncompromising here. If a grant is awarded in distinct rounds like version 8.0 and version 9.0, you must provide separate disclosures for each round.
Oh, wow. So no combining them.
None. Merging them destroys the forensic accounting trail. The public needs to be able to evaluate the return on investment for WEF 8.0 independently from WEF 9.0.
Okay, so resist the temptation to consolidate funding streams just because they share a similar name. You have to keep the labels distinct.
Absolutely.
Now, here is another area where I can see well-meaning administrators getting totally lost. And that's separating the cost of the promotional materials from the cost of the actual program.
Oh, this is perhaps the most frequent misinterpretation of the rule.
Let's walk through the EDD's example on this. A university receives a $275,000 grant for an English language learner program. The department decides to build a dedicated website to promote it to the community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they spend $5,000 of the grant money on web design and hosting.
Okay.
When they put the Stevens Amendment text in the footer of that website, do they list the $5,000 it cost to build the site or the $275,000 cost of the underlying program?
They must list the cost of the overarching program, always.
Really?
Wow.
Not just the website cost?
Right. The disclosure is never about the cost of the specific medium, whether that's a website, a PowerPoint, or a printed brochure. The public doesn't need a nutrition label for the promotional overhead. They need the nutrition label for the actual scientific or community initiative.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so that website footer must state that the English Language Learner Program is fully funded by a $275,000 award.
Which definitely elevates the transparency. They want to know the size of the entire initiative. But bringing up websites brings us to a very modern structural problem.
Okay, what's that?
Well, a university today has a massive digital footprint, right? How on earth do you fit a highly detailed, multi-sentence legal disclaimer onto a social media post with strict character limits?
Yeah, that's a very real challenge.
Yeah.
But the Department of Labor Desk Aid actually provides a highly practical workaround for digital constraints.
Oh, really?
Yeah. For platforms like social media where character limits make the full text impossible, utilizing a hyperlink is completely acceptable.
Okay, so a researcher can post a quick update about their HHS-funded study on Twitter and simply include a link that says, view funding details here, which directs users to a central web page with the full Stevens Amendment language.
Yes, exactly. That fully satisfies the requirement for digital platforms. However, and this is a big however, administrators need to train their staff on one crucial caveat. You cannot apply that digital workaround to physical media.
Well, yeah, because you obviously can't click a piece of paper.
Precisely. If you are printing a brochure, a flyer, or a conference toolkit, the hyperlink strategy is totally void. The full text of the Stevens Amendment disclosure must be explicitly printed on the document.
Okay, we have covered a lot of granular detail here, and to ensure this doesn't just feel like a wave of overwhelming regulatory noise for you listening, let's distill this into a highly actionable 5-step checklist.
That sounds like a great idea.
Right. If you are a university compliance officer or a researcher looking to systematize this tomorrow, here's your playbook. Step 1, identify the funding source.
And this requires more investigative work than it seems. I mean, funds often don't come directly from Washington.
What do you mean?
Well, the money might originate at the Department of Labor, but they grant it to a state workforce agency who then subawards it to the university. To the researcher, it looks like state money. But federal compliance flows downstream. You have to trace the money back to its absolute origin, so DOL, HHS, or ED.
That is a massive insight. Don't just look at the signature on the check. Look at the origin of the funds. Okay, step 2, calculate the formula.
Yeah, and this should be handled centrally. When a grant is awarded, the Sponsored Programs Office or the Central Fiscal Team should calculate the exact percentages in dollar amounts for the federal and non-federal shares.
So take it out of the researcher's hand.
Exactly. Lock that formula in and distribute it to the principal investigator so they aren't guessing at the map every time they create a public document.
Love that. Step 3, audit your public footprint. Now, we mentioned websites and social media, but what are the hidden danger zones?
Visual presentations are a major blind spot.
Really? Like PowerPoints?
Yes. If a principal investigator is presenting a slide deck at a national conference, and that deck describes their federally funded project, one of those slides must contain the disclosure. Toolkits, requests for proposals, and bid invitations sent to outside vendors also frequently get missed.
Wow. Okay. Step 4, embed the label into your monitoring. You can't just hope people remember to do this, right? You have to build a tripwire to catch it.
Absolutely. The sources strongly advise integrating Stevens Amendment checks into both programmatic and fiscal monitoring reports.
How does that look in practice?
For example, before a fiscal compliance officer approves an invoice for a massive print run of brochures, they should have a checklist item that requires verifying the disclosure is included in the proof. Basically, catch the error before the money is spent.
Which perfectly sets up step 5. Manage the print run. Let's say you do that audit tomorrow and you find a storage closet full of thousands of expensive glossy brochures for an HHS project and none of them have the label. Does the university have to eat the cost and throw them all in the shredder?
Fortunately, no. The government's priority is transparency moving forward, not punishing you by forcing the destruction of existing resources. The guidance explicitly states that you do not need to discard existing non-compliant materials.
Oh, that's a relief.
Yeah. However, you must update the design templates immediately so that any future printings of those documents include the proper disclosure.
That is a very pragmatic approach from the agencies, actually. But let's talk about the consequences of ignoring this checklist, because we all know university administrators are juggling 100 different fires every day. What are the actual stakes here? Are federal auditors really combing through promotional flyers to check for a missing sentence?
They absolutely are. Now, the sources clarify that there isn't a direct, automatic financial fine written into the Stevens Amendment itself, but the mechanisms for penalizing noncompliance are severe, and they're systemic.
So how does that actually impact a university's operations?
Well, if auditors discover missing disclosures during a triennial audit, it typically results in an area of concern, or AOC, being formally attached to your institution's record.
An area of concern? That doesn't sound great.
It isn't. It isn't just a private slap on the wrist. It actively flags your administrative infrastructure as high risk.
And when a university's researchers go to apply for their next highly competitive, multi-million-dollar federal grant, that area of concern just sits on their profile, forcing agencies to question their ability to manage funds properly.
Exactly. It damages institutional reputation. Furthermore, it often triggers a corrective action plan, or CAP.
Oh, I've heard of those. They sound tedious.
Very. This forces the university to divert hundreds of hours of administrative time to prove to the federal government that they have fixed the loophole. And in cases of severe or repeated noncompliance, agencies actually have the authority to place special conditions on future awards, or even initiate suspension and debarment proceedings.
Wait, meaning freezing your ability to access federal funds altogether? The stakes are incredibly high, and the political environment surrounding this is really only getting more intense. You know, the Shepard-Smith newsletter highlights a piece of legislation that illustrates the bipartisan scrutiny on this issue. It's the COST Act of 2021.
Yes, the Cost Openness and Spending Transparency Act, sponsored by Senator Joni Ernst.
Right. And the bill proposed that if an awardee failed to comply with these disclosure requirements, the federal government would be authorized to withhold up to 25% of the awarded funds until the issue was corrected.
Now, just to provide the full context from the newsletter here, that specific bill did not pass the House or the Senate. It is not current law.
Sure, yeah. But the fact that legislation proposing a 25% financial penalty was introduced and heavily debated, I mean, that shows exactly where the wind is blowing in Washington. Lawmakers are actively looking for ways to give the Stevens Amendment sharper teeth.
Yeah, the legislative appetite for transparency is only increasing. The best defense really is a proactive offense. Establishing a robust, centralized compliance infrastructure now protects your research programs from whatever strict enforcement mechanisms might be enacted in the future.
We have covered incredible ground today. I mean, We started with the chaos of chocolate milkshake day and ended up deep in the mechanisms of federal audits and corrective action plans. But the core takeaway for everyone listening is to really reframe how you view the Stevens Amendment.
Absolutely.
It is not just bureaucratic red tape. It is the mandatory nutrition label for your life's work. When the public knows exactly what ingredients are funding a project, it demystifies the science and builds fundamental trust between universities and the taxpayers who support them.
It does. And, if we pull back and look at the broader implications, this level of transparency raises a really fascinating question about the future of scientific research.
Oh, like what?
Well, modern research is increasingly collaborative, right? You're pooling money from federal agencies, state pass-throughs, and private foundations.
Right. The funding structures are more complex than ever before.
So as this mandatory transparency becomes more visible, as everyday citizens can effortlessly read the financial nutrition labels on every community initiative, on every medical breakthrough, on every space telescope launch, how will that shift public perception?
That's a great point.
If taxpayers can clearly see exactly how much they are paying for specific outcomes, will public opinion eventually begin to dictate what types of projects get funded in the first place? When the financial ingredients are fully exposed, does the public demand a different kind of return on their investment?
Wow. That is a profound thought to leave on. Will the transparency of the label change the recipe of what we decide to research? Something for all of you to explore on your own as you audit your communication materials this week. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We hope this empowers you to build a stronger, more transparent infrastructure at your institution. Keep questioning, keep organizing, and most importantly, keep learning. See you next time.